Picture this. It's August 27th, 2018. In a maximum security prison in Alabama, correctional officers are doing something they've done thousands of times before. They're escorting an inmate to the execution chamber. But this time, it takes considerably longer than usual, because the man being wheeled through that corridor isn't a hardened, physically imposing killer in the prime of his life. He's 83 years old. His white hair catches the fluorescent light. His breathing is labored. And somewhere deep inside that frail body, behind those ancient, unreadable eyes, lives the mind of one of the most methodically evil men the American justice system has ever prosecuted. His name was Walter Leroy Moody Jr., and when the state of Alabama put him to death that night, he became the oldest person executed in the United States in half a century. But here's what nobody talks about. Walter Moody wasn't alone. There is a category of condemned men in American history. Men who arrived on death row young, sometimes reckless, sometimes calculated, who then aged inside those walls. They watched decades dissolve. They grew gray. They grew frail. Some went blind. Some lost their ability to walk. And then, after 30, 40, sometimes 50 years of waiting, the state finally came to collect what it was owed. Tonight, we're going inside 4 of the most haunting, disturbing, and philosophically troubling cases in modern American legal history. We're talking about the crimes that put these men away. Crimes so brutal, you won't be able to comprehend how human beings are capable of them. We're talking about what 4 decades inside a 6x9 cell does to a person, psychologically, physically, spiritually. And we're asking the question that will follow you long after this video ends. Is executing a frail, elderly person justice? Or is it something else entirely? Stay with me, because this story goes much darker before it gets anywhere close to resolved. And as we pull back the curtain on these chilling, decades-old crimes, crimes that the justice system never forgot, no matter how many years passed, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Every week, we go deeper into the darkest corridors of the American justice system, the stories that mainstream media buried, the cases that rewrote legal history. You don't want to miss what's coming. Now, let's go in. To understand Walter Leroy Moody Jr., you have to understand one fundamental truth about him. He was a man who believed he had been wronged by the system, and he spent 2 decades constructing his revenge with the patience of a chess grandmaster. Moody was born in 1927 in Georgia. By most accounts, he was intelligent, dangerously so. He had a lawyer's mind for strategy and a con man's gift for deception. But his criminal history stretched back decades before his most notorious act. In 1972, Moody was convicted of possessing a pipe bomb. He served time. He seethed. For years, he obsessed over the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which had upheld his conviction. He wrote letters. He filed motions. He appealed and appealed and appealed again. And every time the legal system slammed a door in his face, something dark and methodical hardened inside him. By the late 1980s, Walter Moody had a plan. Not an impulsive plan, not the kind of plan born from rage in a single terrible moment. A calculated, meticulous, deeply premeditated plan that he had been refining for years inside his own head. He was going to build bombs, and he was going to mail them to the people he blamed for destroying his life. On December 16, 1989, 2 weeks before Christmas, a package arrived at the Mountain Brook, Alabama home of Robert Vance, a federal judge for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Vance's wife, Helen, watched her husband open it.
The explosion killed Robert Vance instantly. Helen Vance survived, but she would carry the physical and psychological wounds of that day for the rest of her life. 2 days later, 2 days, a second package bomb killed Robert E. Robinson, a black civil rights attorney in Savannah, Georgia. Robinson had no direct connection to Moody's legal battles. He was targeted, investigators would later conclude, to throw off the investigation, to make it look like racially motivated violence. This was not a man acting out of blind rage. This was strategy. The investigation that followed was one of the largest in FBI history at the time. Over 100 agents worked the case. They collected thousands of pieces of evidence. And slowly, painstakingly, the trail led back to one man, Walter Leroy Moody Jr., 62 years old at the time of his arrest. His trial was a spectacle. His own wife, Susan Moody, whom he had coached and manipulated for years, ultimately turned on him, providing testimony that sealed his fate.
He was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that will make your stomach drop. Walter Moody spent 28 years on Alabama's death row. 28 years. He arrived as a man in his early 60s, already past his prime. He watched administrations change. He watched fellow inmates be executed. He filed appeals, always appeals, cycling through the court system that had defined and destroyed his life. And then, on August 27, 2018, at the age of 83, he was wheeled into the execution chamber. Eyewitness accounts describe a man who was thin, white-haired, and appeared genuinely frail. He was helped onto the gurney. He required assistance adjusting to lie flat. His last words, "I have been persecuted for crimes I didn't do." Even in his final moments, Walter Leroy Moody Jr. was playing the only role he had ever truly believed in. The role of the wronged man, the victim of a broken system. The state of Alabama disagreed. He was pronounced dead at 8:42 p.m. The execution of Walter Leroy Moody Jr. reopened a debate that had been simmering in legal and moral circles for decades. At what point does age make execution constitutionally cruel? There's no clean answer, and we're going to find that out case by agonizing case as we continue. Because what Moody experienced, those 28 years of waiting, that's not even close to the longest wait on this list. Not even close. If Walter Moody's story is about obsessive, methodical evil, then the story of Clarence Ray Allen is about something arguably more disturbing. A man who continued to order murders from inside a prison cell. A man who turned his incarceration itself into a criminal enterprise. Clarence Ray Allen was born in 1930 in Fresno, California, of Choctaw Native American descent. By the 1970s, he had built a reputation as a smooth, controlling figure in the agricultural community of the San Joaquin Valley. He ran a security business. People trusted him. That trust was the weapon he used to kill them. In 1974, Allen recruited a young man named Billy Ray Hamilton to burglarize the home of Mary Sue Kitts, a 17-year-old girl who had discovered that Allen was embezzling from his own company and was planning to report him. Hamilton strangled Mary Sue Kitts and threw her body into a canal. Allen was convicted as an accessory. He received a life sentence. And most people assumed the story ended there. They were wrong. From inside Fresno County Jail, while awaiting trial for the Kitts murder, Allen orchestrated his most devastating crime yet.
He sent word to his associates on the outside: eliminate the witnesses who testified against him. On September 5, 1980, gunmen walked into Fran's Market, a small grocery store in Fresno. They opened fire. 3 people were murdered: 17-year-old Douglas Scott White, 18-year-old Brian Schletewitz, and 27-year-old Josephine Rocha. These weren't combatants. These weren't people who had wronged Allen in any meaningful way. They were kids. They were workers. They were witnesses who had done nothing more than tell the truth. Allen was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 1982. And then he waited. Allen spent 23 years on death row at San Quentin. He arrived a man in his early 50s, physically formidable, alert, combative in court. But the years inside did what years always do. By the time his execution date was set, January 17, 2006, Clarence Ray Allen was 76 years old. He had become legally blind. He had suffered a heart attack in 2005 that left him partially incapacitated. He required a wheelchair to move. His attorneys argued that executing him would be unconstitutional, cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment. They pointed to his blindness, his heart condition, his advanced age. They argued that a man in his condition could not meaningfully participate in his own execution. The courts were unmoved. They also presented a chilling counterpoint. The victims of the 1980 Fran's Market massacre were never given the opportunity to grow old. Douglas White, Brian Schletewitz, Josephine Rocha. Their families had waited 26 years for this moment. But here's the thing about Clarence Ray Allen that made his case philosophically unlike almost any other on death row. He fully expected to die of natural causes before his execution date ever arrived. And by the numbers, he almost did. Following his 2005 heart attack, prison medical staff had resuscitated him. Think about that for a moment. The state of California, the same state preparing to execute him, had actively worked to keep him alive. There is something deeply strange about that paradox. A system that resuscitates you so that it can later kill you on its own schedule. And I want to pause right here, because this is the question that splits death penalty scholars right down the middle. Is spending 23 years on death row, losing your sight, losing your health, arriving at the execution chamber in a wheelchair, is that a harsher punishment than death itself? Some argue that death row, psychologically, is its own execution, stretched across decades, administered in slow motion. Others say that's precisely the point, that justice requires accountability, not comfort, not natural death, not a peaceful exit in a prison hospital bed. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. I read every single one. And this next part of Allen's story, it's going to sharpen that question into something almost unbearable. In the early hours of January 17, 2006, Clarence Ray Allen was brought to the execution chamber at San Quentin. He could not walk. He was brought in his wheelchair. His ankles were swollen. His vision was nearly gone. He was helped onto the gurney with the assistance of multiple correctional officers. And then, in what witnesses described as an eerily quiet, almost clinical moment, the lethal injection was administered. It was 12:01 a.m. when the process began. He was pronounced dead at 12:19 a.m. His last words, "I would like to say that I am sorry for all the pain that I have caused. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Whether those words were genuine contrition or a final performance from a man who had spent his life manipulating others, nobody can say for certain. What we can say is this: At 76 years, 4 months, Clarence Ray Allen was, at that time, one of the oldest people executed in the United States since the reinstatement of capital punishment in 1976. His was a case that forced California and the nation to grapple with a question that has no easy answer. But as dark as Allen's story is, there's a man whose story stretches even further back, whose wait on death row was longer, whose crimes were so methodically sadistic that even hardened investigators describe them as uniquely disturbing. There are killers who announce themselves, who fill courtrooms with rage and newspapers with quotable menace. And then there are killers like John Nixon Jr. John Nixon was 67 years old when the state of Mississippi executed him by lethal injection on December 14, 2005. He had spent 30 years on death row, arriving in 1975 as a 37-year-old man and aging, incrementally and almost invisibly, into someone who bore almost no physical resemblance to the man who had committed his crime. 30 years. To put that in perspective, a child born the year Nixon was sentenced would have finished high school, gone to college, started a career, perhaps started a family, all before the state of Mississippi delivered the sentence it had promised back in 1975. Nixon's crime was the murder of Velma Noblin, a convenience store clerk who was shot and killed during a robbery. What set Nixon's case apart was not the shock and awe brutality that characterized some of the other cases on this list. It was something quieter, something more ordinary, and perhaps because of that ordinariness, in some ways more chilling. Velma Noblin was a woman simply doing her job. A robbery, a decision to pull a trigger, a life gone. And then 30 years of appeals, delays, legal challenges, and procedural machinery. The vast, slow grind of the American justice system before accountability finally arrived. Nixon's decades on death row raised a question that legal scholars and death penalty opponents return to again and again. When a man has aged beyond recognition from the person who committed the crime, is he still the same person you sentenced? There is real neuroscientific and philosophical weight to this question. The human brain undergoes profound changes across decades. Personality, impulse control, the biological architecture of violence, all of these change with age. Many criminologists argue that the 67-year-old John Nixon, who was executed in 2005, was, in measurable neurological terms, a fundamentally different person from the 37-year-old man who pulled that trigger. Mississippi's answer to that philosophical argument was simple. The crime was committed. The sentence was lawful. The execution was carried out. Nixon was pronounced dead at 6:14 p.m. on December 14, 2005. He offered no final statement. The quiet nature of John Nixon's execution and the quiet nature of his 3 decades of waiting stands in sharp contrast to our next subject. Because if Nixon was a quiet horror, our final chapter is about something that goes even deeper. Not another name, not another case file, but the thing underneath all of these stories. The thing nobody in true crime ever stops long enough to examine. And before we go into this final chapter, which is, without question, the most unsettling part of this entire video, if this deep dive has made you think differently about capital punishment, about aging, about justice and time, and what it means to hold a person accountable across the span of decades, hit the like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel bring you more investigative content like this. The stories buried beneath the headlines, the cases the system prefers you forget. One tap, that's all it takes. Now, let's go deeper. Here's something the true crime world rarely talks about. When we discuss the oldest people executed in American history, we're having one conversation. But hiding inside that conversation is a different, arguably more haunting one. What does death row actually do to a human being across 30 or 40 years? Psychologists who study long-term incarceration have a name for what happens to inmates who spend decades in the specific psychological environment of death row. Death row phenomenon. It's not just a phrase, it's a documented syndrome, first articulated in a landmark legal challenge in the 1980s. The premise is this: the prolonged uncertainty and isolation of waiting for execution, for years, sometimes decades, constitutes its own form of psychological torture, distinct from, and in addition to, the execution itself. Think about what that actually means. Every single morning, you wake up not knowing if today is the day someone tells you your appeals have been exhausted. Every holiday, every season, every news cycle is filtered through the lens of a man who has been legally condemned to die, but hasn't died yet. There's no planning for the future, because the future is an execution chamber. There's no real present either, because the present is a cell. Some inmates describe it as being trapped in a perpetual, slow-motion freefall. Now factor in age. As these men grew older on death row, their physical deterioration added new layers of cruelty to the psychological architecture of their situation. Clarence Ray Allen lost his sight. Walter Leroy Moody, a man who had, in his prime, been sharp enough to construct explosive devices that evaded FBI detection for months, spent his final years in a state of physical frailty that required a wheelchair. Some inmates on death row developed dementia. Some lost the ability to communicate coherently. In several cases, legal challenges were raised asking whether a condemned man who could no longer understand why he was being executed could constitutionally be executed. The Supreme Court has said, in Ford v. Wainwright in 1986, that the Eighth Amendment prohibits executing someone who is legally insane, who cannot understand the reality and reason for their punishment. But dementia? Severe age-related cognitive decline in someone who was legally competent when sentenced? That's murkier. Far murkier. And there are cases, not just on this list, but across the broader landscape of American capital punishment, where the legal system has had to confront the nightmarish question of whether the person strapped to the gurney is truly the same legal entity as the person who was sentenced.
This is the conversation that the cases of men like Walter Leroy Moody, Clarence Ray Allen, and John Nixon force us to have. Not just about whether the death penalty is right or wrong as an abstract principle, but about what it means when the machinery of capital punishment moves slowly enough that age itself becomes part of the punishment. And here's the darkest irony of all. Death row was never designed to be a 30-year sentence. It was designed to be a waiting room, a brief anteroom before the execution carried out the sentence. The delays, the decades of legal appeals, the procedural backlogs, the evolving standards of constitutional review created an accidental system. A system where men grew old inside a sentence that was never designed to accommodate aging. There is no clean moral here. If you believe in the death penalty, you might argue that these men were given more time than their victims ever got, that the delays were a gift they didn't deserve, that executing them at 83 or 76 is still justice, because justice doesn't come with an expiration date. If you oppose the death penalty, you might argue that what these men experienced was a form of torture that no civilized society should sanction, that the psychological and physical deterioration of decades on death row transformed the sentence into something qualitatively different from what was originally imposed. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Both arguments are coherent. Both arguments have been made by brilliant legal minds, and the American justice system has never fully resolved the tension between them. It leaves us somewhere strange, in a place where the story of Walter Leroy Moody, a methodical bomb maker wheeled to his death at 83, sits alongside the story of Clarence Ray Allen, a blind, wheelchair-bound man helped onto a gurney to die, and demands that we look at both without flinching, without reducing either to a simple headline. The oldest people executed in modern American history were not the men they once were when they committed their crimes. They were also, undeniably, the men who committed those crimes. Those two facts do not cancel each other out. They sit in permanent, unresolvable tension inside a justice system that was built on the premise that punishment can be both just and humane. That it can look a 76-year-old blind man in the eye and say, "This is necessary," and that it can simultaneously claim the moral high ground of civilized society. The victims of Walter Leroy Moody's mail bombs never got to grow old. The 3 young people murdered inside Fran's Market in 1980 never got to grow old. And the families of those victims waited, just like the inmates waited, for a justice system that moved at its own deliberate, sometimes agonizing pace. There is no comfortable place to land at the end of this story, only the questions it leaves behind. At what age does execution become something different? Can a sentence imposed on a man in his 30s or 40s be meaningfully carried out on a man in his 70s or 80s? And does justice, real justice, require us to know the answer? If you made it to the end of this video, thank you, genuinely. This is one of the most complex, emotionally demanding topics we've ever covered on this channel, and I'm grateful you stayed for all of it. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I mean that. This is exactly the kind of conversation that deserves more than a headline. And share this video with someone who you think needs to sit with these questions. We'll see you next time in the darkest corner of the story nobody else is telling.